Supervisor.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a special meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. It's a budget hearing. Today's Wednesday, May 20th, 2020. You can join me in the Pledge of Allegiance if you'd like to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Councilmember Jordan?
Here.
Councilmember Gutierrez? I'm sorry, Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. Mayor Pro Tem Snedden?
Here.
Councilmember Friedman, I think, has not yet joined us, although he may in a moment here. Councilmember Harmon?
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Present.
No.
Councilmember Friedman?
What's that, man? Stay on.
Councilmember Friedman? We'll come back to Councilmember
Can
Friedman.
you tell
And Mayor Murillo.
Here. Thank you very much. We'll go to public comment. This is a special part of the meeting for items that are not on our agenda today. So what's on our agenda today is a budget review of our fire department, police department, finance department. The city attorney's department will be reviewed on June 2nd as a clarification to the public. So Ms. Clerk, is there anyone you think there for general public comment?
Madam Mayor, there is no one here for general public comment.
Okay, we'll open and close that and move on to our first and only item. Would you read that into the record, please, Ms. Gorman?
Yes, item 1, fiscal year 2021 recommended operating and capital budget.
And according to what I can see here, the fire department is going first. And Chief Nickel, are you all set up, ready to go in this new format? Strange.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Yes, I am up and ready, thanking all the training that the city received from from Mr. Wong. So we are up and ready to go. I'm joined today by three of my colleagues, Business Manager Ron Lechty, Division Chief and Fire Marshal Joe Pori, and Operations Division Chief Lee Waldron. Ron and I will be doing the primary bulk of the presentation, and Fire Marshal Pori and Chief Waldron are available for any sort of technical questions that may come up related to their divisions. To kick this off, this is my 14th year of being part of and/or presenting a budget. And, I've been through two different economic downturns and a very significant fire department restructuring. And the one thing that I know is that we're going to get through this. And while we acknowledge that these are very difficult and challenging times, we've gotten through in the fire department and the city equally as difficult, challenging times. The team that's presenting today, we represent the 106 men and women of the Santa Barbara Fire Department, and our budget really reflects the mission and the values of the fire department, the council, and the city. So with that, we'll go ahead and advance the slide, and I will turn it over to Business Manager Ron Lechty for the first 10 or so slides.
Hi, Mr. Lechty.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm pleased to present the Fire Department's fiscal year 21 budget, and we're going to start with a presentation outline today, and this is it. We'll be looking at a department overview, followed by some program highlights. We'll take a look at the general fund budget, the recommended changes, the capital discussion, and then the chief will take over with the impacts of COVID to our budget, our reductions, and our accomplishments going forward. So moving on to our department overview, this is the fire department's organization chart. The fire department's organized into three main divisions: our fire operations, fire prevention bureau, and fire administration. Together, we have 7 programs and 106 full-time equivalents. This slide shows the fire department's 3 funds. The general fund comprises 99% of our activity and budget at $30,813,000. The fire equipment fund is where we account for grants and equipment replacement, primarily our mobile data computer items. The Wildland Fire Suppression Assessment District Fund is a special revenue fund that provides vegetation reduction, road clearance, and other fuel management services to property owners within the district. Taking a look at our fire programs, I brought this slide in for you to see to give the relative size of the programs in proportion of as a proportion of the budget. Fire, like I said, has 3 divisions. The first division we'll talk about here is the operations division, and it has the first 3 programs you see on there: aircraft rescue and firefighting, training, and operations. And together, they comprise 88% of the budget, which is very close to the full-time equivalents, if you recall. The Fire Prevention Bureau contains the next 3 programs of wildland prevention, emergency services, and public education, and they account for 8% of our budget. And finally, the Fire Administration Division is just 1 program and is 4% of our budget. Looking more closely at our fire operations, we have 8 fire stations strategically located to provide the best response and coverage for the city. Our fire station number 8 is the station at the airport. The previous slide showed that our fire ops division constitutes 88% of the budget. And that course, well, I already said that corresponds to the 89 full-time equivalents. Fire is always operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and each day is staffed by 29 firefighters led by a battalion chief. Our fire department is an all-risk department and responds to a multitude of hazards. Besides fires, we provide emergency medical response, hazardous materials response, water rescue, wildland fire response, urban search and rescue, airport rescue and firefighting, mutual aid response, and automatic aid response to neighboring jurisdictions. This is our training and recruitment program with 1.8 full-time equivalents. Fire training recruits quality personnel into the fire service. They ensure that all active duty personnel receive proper training that is required by local, state, and federal regulations, and that mandated certifications are maintained. Training and recruitment also ensures that every firefighter is outfitted with the appropriate safety and personal protective equipment gear. Moving into our Fire Prevention Bureau, it's our other division. The Fire Prevention Bureau protects life, property, and the environment from the perils of fire, hazardous materials incidents, and other disasters through the effective code enforcement, through new development plan checks, fire investigations, and they support the engine company's fire inspection program. Fire Prevention participates in Community Development's land development team. It reduces the impact of wildland fire in the community through fire resistive construction code enforcement and fire safe community development guidelines. They conduct fire code enforcement compliance inspections and fire prevention inspections at the airport and adjacent city areas. Our emergency services and public education program under the Fire Prevention Division has 2 full-time equivalents. This program ensures that the city is ready to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the effects of major emergencies that threaten the lives, property, and the environment by conducting comprehensive safety education programs for the public, by training city employees regarding their disaster service roles, and administrating interagency coordination activities that assist the city's emergency management efforts. This slide shows some of the activities the program provides. And finally, this is our third division, our smallest at 5 full-time equivalents, fire administration. It consumes 4% of the budget. It provides leadership, policy direction, and administrative support to the entire department. Picture on the bottom left is a picture of our administrative office building on Chapala Street. These are offices that hold the Prevention Bureau office members, staff members, and administration staff. Our warehouse is also part of this building, and in the back, the property adjoins to Fire Station 1. Now we're going to take a look at the recommended changes to the fiscal year 2021 budget. We're going to begin by looking at the fire department's proposed revenues and the changes to them. This is the fire's revenues, and we're proposing a recommendation of $5,012,000. This is an increase of $434,000 over the original plan. Looking at the first line, fees and service charges, we're asking to increase this by $129,000, and that's due to a fee study recommendation and new cost recovery revenues. And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. Next comes the Interfund Reimbursements, and this is the airport reimbursement for the services that the fire department provides for the airport. This $119,000 change represents MOU contract updates and finance assumptions that have changed since they originally forecast in 2019. The third line, grants, this $185,000 change in the grants revenue is the Community Wildland Protection Plan grant that we received in 2020, and this is the second year we're expecting to receive $185,000 in grant revenue per that grant. There's no other recommended changes for the other revenues, but keep in mind that these are all pre-COVID assumptions. Okay, as I said, we're going to take a little closer look at the proposed fees. These are our fees and service charges. Fire conducted a fee study this year. We hadn't had one for about 15 years. We recognize the need to recover our costs. We have to take a look at our costs and the time we spend performing our programs and activities. We had a fee consultant come in and perform that study for us, and he came up with recommendations that we implemented into this chart here. At Finance Committee, like I said, we discussed this at length, and the committee members expressed the idea that due to the COVID impact on businesses and the community, now is probably not the ideal time to raise rates even significantly. So perhaps some kind of phase-in could be done on these fee increases, and we'll be exploring that option. Next, we're looking at the general fund's overall changes to its expenditures, its appropriations. And we see here that the recommended budget asks for $30,813,000. And this is a $574,000 increase from the original plan. Salaries and benefits, the first couple of lines on the chart, constitute 88% of our budget. The $380,000 recommended changes derives from MOU updates and finance assumptions that have changed since the original forecast in 2019. Allocated costs, the next line, also rise by $115,000. Almost half of this is due to increased allocations for computer, network, and infrastructure programs. Supplies and services and equipment are also showing increase due to increase in technology costs and equipment purchases. And I just wanted to give you an example of, we call them turnout suits, the yellow protective suits that the firefighters wear. Those have become quite more expensive. Just 5 years ago, they were 2/3 the price of what they are now. So they've increased by 1/3 over just the last few years, and they cost over $3,000 for trousers and coats these days. So the fire department, we have a capital program. We have one project in the capital program, and it is the remodel or reconstruction of Fire Station number 7. And due to the COVID and the financial crisis, this remodel has been put on pause for the next year, and we're removing that $1.5 million from the original plan. Next, we're going to look at the budgetary impacts of COVID. And I'm here to tell you about just the first slide here. And this is the revenue impacts. This slide takes a look at what COVID is doing to fire's revenues, at least what we can derive so far. The first line, public safety, half-cent sales tax. In fiscal year 20, we estimate this to have an unfavorable variance of $40,000. And in the next fiscal year, we estimate that 50% of this estimated revenue for this tax will not come in. It's just an educated guess at this point. We don't really have any data on that. Just we want to put something more logical than full 100% revenues. The COVID economy has also taken a toll on fires, fees and service charges, the next line. In fiscal year 2020, we don't expect to realize at least $56,000 of these revenues. And again, that's due to we stopped sending out fire inspection notices, and revenues from the fees generated from plan checks has dwindled down quite a bit since COVID. In fiscal year 21, the $157,000 reduction represents 50% of the budget. Again, we're taking a 50% off just due to COVID. At this time, it's unclear exactly what the economy will do to fire's other revenues. Mutual aid is driven by fire incidents and calls for response, and that varies wildly from year to year. The airport reimbursement is based on the fire's operations as Fire Station 8, and can airport afford these services in light of decreased flights and airport's decreased revenue? The ambulance fees are stable, and per a contract we have with American Medical Response, we don't believe this revenue will be impacted, but we do hear anecdotally that the number of medical transports has been down since COVID has started. And the Wildland assessment is received from the County Assessor's Office and should be received as usual. And with that, I can now hand the presentation over to Chief Nickel.
Thank you so much, Ron. I'm going to cover the unanticipated COVID-19 expenses that were incurred by the fire department. When this came on in early March, as we were starting to prepare for it, we had to go out into a very competitive marketplace and purchase personal protective equipment. This included additional masks, gowns, gloves for our personnel. The fire department took on a very important role citywide. We really are the city's healthcare provider, even though we are called the fire department. And so we have the subject matter expertise within the fire department to provide that leadership and technical advice through our EMS battalion chief, Chief Males, as well as our medical doctor that we have on contract with the fire department, Dr. Jason Prostowski. So we were providing all types of support for all city departments, primarily the departments that had public safety folks that would include police department, harbor patrol, and some of the airport public safety folks. The other unanticipated COVID costs had to do with overtime. The fire department is a pretty lean operation. If you look back historically, 15, 17 years ago, we had 124 full-time equivalents, and built into that number were lots of relief personnel that when someone was off sick or had to take vacation or some other form of leave, we would backfill with that position. Well, today we're running with 106 full-time equivalents, and we don't have any of those relief personnel. So when we had personnel taking time off because they were either getting tested or there was a potential exposure to COVID, or they were taking care of a high-risk person at home or someone who had been exposed at home that they had to self-quarantine, we had to utilize overtime. We also stood up the countywide incident management team, and we incurred some overtime with personnel that were assigned assisting in the regional operation and emergency management. So we incurred, between the additional cost of personal protective equipment, that was about $60,000. And then the additional overtime is projected to be somewhere in the $250,000 to $300,000 range that was not built into this year's current budget. Next slide, please. Now, we are actively pursuing every cost recovery opportunity related to COVID. We are part of 2 different grant submissions right now. One that we partnered with the police department for a Department of Justice grant that would reimburse us primarily for the personal protective supplies that we had to go and procure. There also is a county-wide regional grant that we are a part of with all the public safety providers in the county that are applying for a FEMA grant to recover both personal protective equipment costs as well as some of these unanticipated expenditures that were incurred by all fire agencies within the county. Clearly, we're following very closely the League of California Cities. You know that I'm on the board of directors for the League, and I'm privy to some, detailed conversations and discussions about some form of either state or federal relief for local agencies, and we are actively pursuing every cost recovery opportunity that would be afforded to cities. Next slide, please. Some of the impacts to the current service levels, we've tried to protect operations and directly responding to calls and taking care of the community. That is of utmost importance. All of the support functions we are taking a very close look at. One of the things that we looked at for this current fiscal year is how we could save some money due to these unanticipated expenses. As Ron mentioned earlier, we currently are in the middle of a fire academy with our 10 new recruits. We made a decision to shorten the fire academy and get these folks onto the shift as sooner than we had anticipated. That's going to save us several thousand, tens of thousands of dollars in overtime, as well as moving some of the personnel that go out to the academy and train these folks back to shift quicker. As I mentioned earlier, we run with a very minimum number of fire personnel. So when one person is temporarily reassigned to the fire academy, that creates overtime. So really the savings that we're seeing right now through this fiscal year will be in reduction in overtime. We've taken a very close look at all of our operating costs within the fire department, and we have eliminated any overtime except for minimum staffing and emergency response. The last thing that we're proposing for certainly the rest of this fiscal year as well as fiscal year 21, we have 2 support positions that are currently vacant that we are proposing to keep vacant and unfunded in fiscal year 2021. That would be an administrative support position for the Fire Prevention Bureau, as well as our logistics and warehouse specialist that supports getting the supplies ordered and delivered to all the stations. Next slide, please. And again, as I mentioned, we're aggressively out there pursuing every grant opportunity we can. We stood up a grant committee within the fire department. You're going to see a donation item come in front of you to accept a donation from the Fire Alliance that allows us to procure access to grant specialists that will help us write successful grants, as well as some of the technical support. Next slide, please. And as mentioned earlier, the capital project that was proposed in next year's budget, we are pausing that for 1 year. We recently entered into a purchase order agreement to purchase a new fire engine that was part of our normal vehicle replacement plan. And we were literally days away from writing a check for $650,000 to buy this fire engine, and we have suspended that purchase for a minimum of 1 year, just to keep that cash on hand. What that means is the fire engines basically become a year older. We mess up the replacement cycle, and it does cost a little bit of money due to maintenance of the older vehicle versus trying to maintain a larger vehicle. We've postponed any large capital expenditure unless it's absolutely mission critical. Next slide, please. Long-term strategies, again, we're here to support the city and the community and the economic recovery, and anything that the fire department can do to support and facilitate those things. We're currently have had meetings with our labor partners to come up with some solutions on cost-saving options and really minimize any impacts to the community. And frankly, this is an opportunity for the fire department to look at innovative approaches to deliver services that may meet new or future current community needs. So before I get into this slide, I just want to provide a little bit of framing for you. As I mentioned earlier, I told you the fire department runs very lean. And there is some history that comes into this leanness. If you go back to fiscal year 2003, the fire department had 124 full-time equivalents. We have 106 full-time equivalents now. In 2003, the fire department ran 7,500 calls. This last year, we ran 10,500. So we're 33% busier with 16% less personnel. So when you look at our budget and you see that 88% of the fire department's budget is personnel costs, when you start talking about some of these reductions, you have to include in that conversation personnel. We don't have a lot of vacant positions that we can hold vacant and make our budget savings. The other number that I put in here is we've done a detailed analysis of what it costs to operate each one of our fire stations, and to operate just one of our substations, not Station 1, the big house downtown where we have 2 companies and the battalion chief, but say like Station 3, Station 4, Station 5, where it's just a 3-person crew operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That total cost to operate that station, and that's everything. That's allocated charges, vehicle charges, capital charges, repair, replacement, as well as just the cost to pay for the crew, is $3.25 million, which is about a 10% cost to our budget. Our budget is being proposed right around $31 million. So I put this number in here just to give you a perspective of what 10% could potentially look like within the fire department. Now, we're certainly not looking at 10% right now, but when you have almost 90% of your budget being personnel costs, getting to that 1.5 target without talking about personnel can be challenging. So we have identified about $750,000 in potential reduction and budget saving costs for next fiscal year. But I do want to let the council know that in order for us to move forward with strategies beyond that do require meeting and conferring and having bargaining sessions with the labor groups to change deployment, modify how we respond, any of those types of things. So fire is actively working on that. You know, I'm sitting at the table, the negotiating table for both IFF as well as fire managers, and we're working through to try to identify some opportunities to reduce some additional costs. Next slide, please. So the last thing that I want to talk about are our program accomplishments. And while we've been on sort of this 2-year process of trying to update our P3s, I understand that the year before I got here, the P3 update was paused for fire in anticipation of the new fire chief getting here. When I got here, one of the first things I wanted to do was get the strategic plan done, because that would inform some of the P3 changes that we would make. We rolled the strategic plan out late 2019, early 2020, and then COVID-19 hit. So we have not had the opportunity to go back and revisit and update our P3 performance measures, but we accomplished a lot in the last year. Certainly getting a forward-looking, 3 to 5 year strategic plan done is huge. We're in the middle of updating our community wildfire protection plan, and I've had some email communications with you over the last couple days where we're extending that public comment opportunity. The fire code, uniform fire code, has been updated. We have deployed Pulse Point for citizen awareness and engagement. We've got this automated, state-of-the-art automatic dispatching system that is literally saving us, seconds, tens of seconds in our call processing and turnout times. We've completed the fee study, and then we're about ready to roll out. We'll be the first city department to roll out a timekeeping module that we anticipate will save upwards of 0.5 of an FTE of administrative support time that would have to manually enter payroll. It's all done automatically right now. So despite all the challenges that we got, we're still moving forward with very important business at hand to modernize and create some efficiencies within the fire department. And with that, we'll go to the last slide, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you, Chief Nickel. Ms. Snedden, you can start off the questions from the council on this item. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief Nickel. It's just really congratulations on all of your accomplishments in this last year. It's pretty incredible. I just want to particularly highlight the strategic plan, but also just all of the general efficiencies in dispatch and in getting to people in need faster. I do have a couple questions for you, but also commendation for efficiency in the technology and the planning that you're doing. You've really brought this department forward and made everything just much more streamlined.
We have a great team.
You do. Thank you. And so I have a couple questions. One is, wildland fire mitigation at 1% of the budget, is that enough? Like, in a perfect world, would that be more? If you could comment on that first.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Snedden, absolutely. It's not enough. We would always want more. I'm a huge proponent of community risk reduction, and you get a lot more bang for your buck overall if you prevent the fires from occurring than have to respond to a fire that has occurred. One of the items that we proposed yesterday to the Finance Committee meeting, the use of some of these additional cost recovery for some of our fire prevention activities would be to hire a contract or a part-time person that could go out and do much more proactive wildland fire inspection and mitigation. Right now, we rely upon the community to make a complaint, or you're part of the wildfire assessment district where we're out there doing that already. But we recognize there are other parts of the city that are not in the fire assessment district. So we would always like to do more. We're trying to balance that with the available resources that we have on hand. And oftentimes there are some competing needs. One of the things that we've seen this year over the last 2 years with, average to above average rainfall, the amount of vegetation that's out there that our crews are trimming out is much greater than they have in the past years. So we do have an idea to do that, but obviously COVID-19 and the fiscal realities may challenge us to accomplish that.
I appreciate that. I know you spent extra days doing fire clearing. I know in San Roque, anyway, we had people calling in saying, "Where are you?" And it's like you had so many extra days clearing brush.
We apparently broke records out in San Roque with the amount of vegetation that was there for us to clear.
Thank you for that. So then that brings me to Fire Station 7, which is also up in the high fire area. And if you could comment on how does delaying construction on that or development of that new station, does that affect our ability to respond? Is it critical that it be looked at now, or is it an opportunity for improvement but that it can be put off? Or how does that affect our ability to respond to fires in that high fire area?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, it doesn't affect our ability to respond at all. The station is still functional. It's not the most efficient stations. It's old, it's outdated, but the crews are still there. We still share it with the Forest Service. We still provide, space for them. So we still have the 2 fire companies up there. We have a little bit of budget money left over from this budget year that will allow us to do a small amount of technical work next year. That 1.5 million figure that you saw there was primarily for, a full architectural development and that creation. So we've essentially pushed that off a year. It just means the crews that live in that station are in an older station for an additional year. The flip side to that is I was with a very hot economy. I was not eager to go into the marketplace to procure a large capital project because everybody's busy right now, and a lot of these large capital projects when they would go out to bid, were coming in significantly over budget. So the flip side of that is we may have an opportunity to go into a much more favorable environment for the buyer and have bids that are lower than we're anticipating because there isn't a lot of work. But we'll have to wait and see as we advance through the next year. Okay,
thank you for that. And then in terms of, I do have a couple more questions. In terms of mutual aid, so now it's not just fire, but it's pandemic, COVID. There's so many different categories of responding to mutual aid. And I mean, from my perspective, it seems like you get no relief because now we've had a break in the fire season a little bit because of rain, but then there's been the COVID. And if you could just, a difficult question, but what happens when we have both fire season starting and something like a pandemic, and how does that affect, I mean, the budget changes? I'm concerned about changing budget too much so that we're not able to respond with mutual aid to all of what you're facing. If you could comment on that.
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon. One, we're all risk, and one of the things that is great about the culture of the fire service is when the plan changes, we're at our best when we adapt and we improvise and we overcome. One, we're used to it. It's what we're all sort of trained for. Two, just overall philosophy on mutual aid and automatic aid. I'm a huge proponent of whoever is closest, no matter what the call is, that's who should go to the call. I think at the end of the day, the community member, the customer, doesn't care what it says on their patch and what color the fire engine is. They want us to get there fast, be professional, and be kind. So we as fire chiefs within the county have, we have that approach. We all come from similar backgrounds where we want to do full boundary drops and send the closest fire engine to whatever the call is. So whether it's pandemic, a medical aid, a large fire, we want to get the closest resources there as quickly as possible. And then to address the last point that you raised about what does fire season look like? We are completely rethinking how we respond to these large wildfires. because as you know, when we set up base camp, it's basically, you know, a boom town that gets set up literally in 24 hours where there's 3,000 to 5,000 people living in close quarters. We're not going to do that anymore. We can't do that. You can't have half your fire force that goes to one of these large fires suddenly, you know, come down with symptoms of COVID, and now you're bringing in additional resources. So really with Chief Waldron and you know, the operations chiefs have been thinking through what does that look like. And then, you know, the incident management teams are thinking about what does that look like. So we have a plan for that. I'm not too terribly concerned about this fire season, our ability to respond. You know, if we go into round 2, round 3 of COVID shutdown, or we're looking at some significant cuts within any fire agency statewide, whether it's local, state, or federal, that's where it could get problematic. But certainly for this fire season, we have a plan, and we feel like we have the personnel to manage that.
Very good to hear. Thank you. Very reassuring. And then could you just maybe comment on, is there a tipping point where if we don't have enough staffing and paying so much extra in overtime that it might be worthwhile to instead up the number of staff? Is there a sweet spot in there, and are we close to it, or how would we adjust that?
Mayor and Councilmember Sneddon, that's a big question. Just a couple of quick thoughts. One, right now, it's less expensive to utilize overtime than it is to go out and hire more firefighters. And that's due primarily to our roll-up costs, our benefits, our pension. And right now, too, we have agreement with our labor group on the number of folks that we will send out of county on these large fires. So we're not, you know, leaving ourselves exposed here, getting folks too tired, that at the end of fire season, when we really need folks here in town, they're too tired or they're hurt from being out all summer. So we've dialed some of that back. Obviously, if the plan changes, then we'll change with that. But right now, we're looking good. You know, ideally, I would love any fire chief would say, I want more personnel, but I get it in the fiscal reality that we're facing. But we have a plan to figure that out, to get through that.
Thank you. And then I just have one more question. And I'm sure that you have this covered, but just so if we could know, so one of the positions holding open is a fire prevention admin specialist. And I think anytime I see fire prevention and that not being filled to its capacity, impacts and how you mitigate the impacts of not having that extra staff member, if you could just comment on that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, this position is the support position for the fire inspector. So this is the person that does the billing, does the scheduling. It is not the person that's out there doing the direct inspections. When we looked at where we could cut, we wanted to make sure that any direct service was not getting cut. That if anything was going to get cut, it would be the administrative staff, the support staff that supports those folks. It's just going to mean that our folks, you know, are going to have to work a little bit harder. We're counting on some technology with Acela that will automate some of these things. But the downside of that is we may not get our inspection bills out, you know, in 15 days. They might go out in 30 or 45 days. So there are going to be some downsides to not having that position here. But it's not the direct folks that are out doing the inspections.
Thank you so much. And I have such confidence in your leadership in this and your efficiencies and really addressing all of these. So thank you for taking the time to answer.
Thank you. Again, it's a great team. I just get to lead a great team. So thank you.
Good. Mr. Jordan, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Mayor. Hi, Chief. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks.
I just have two simple, real questions. Everything that was a pretty good job up till now. One, I want to congratulate you on a permit sheet for showing permits going up 111 and 161% in cost, but it doesn't say how many. So I'm just wondering what the real impact is of that to a consumer. Is it just like a couple hundred going to $400, or what does that do to either renovation or new construction costs?
Let's see if I can get Ron in here to answer that detailed question.
Madam Mayor, Council Member Jordan. Ron Lichty here. Yes, we have 30 different fees, and about 14 of them are plan review check fees. And our biggest increase was in the building plan checks. And we covered some of those major increases. And we were spending a lot more time reviewing those plans than our fees were recovering the cost for. So we are seeing some dramatic increases in a few of those fees.
But what is a typical, is there anything like a typical fee, probably not given the breadth of everything you see, but I mean, is the impact going to be prohibitive on people wanting to renovate or do new construction, or is it pretty manageable, do you think, from a consumer standpoint?
Well, yes, let me just, as an example, I'm going to talk about the commercial construction review. It's a very high, it's a category that we have quite a few of these fees for, the volume. And currently, the current fee is based on square footage. So up to 2,000 square feet, it's a $216 fee. The recommendation is it changes the scale of square feet. So the first scale is up to 2,000 feet, and then 2,000 to 5,000, and then 5,000 to 10,000, and then over 10,000. So the recommended fee is we compact that to just 3 tiers: 0 to 5,000 square feet, and 5,000 to 10,000, and then over 10,000. So I'm trying to explain to you, like verbally, over 10,000 square feet, we used to charge $523. Now it'll be $400 plus $6 for every 1,000 square feet over 10,000 square feet. So $6 for every 1,000 feet over 10,000 square feet.
Okay, that's a good enough example. And it's not big numbers on your thing. It always pains me to see a 100+ increase on any fee all of a sudden. So I'm happy with that. And then Chief, I think my only other question is for you. So you do 10 times the number of medical calls you do fire calls. And I know we've talked about some potential changes off in the future on if we controlled our own life for ambulances and that kind of stuff. But obviously we would still have the burden of needing a fire staff at 8 locations to cover the city with a certain amount of response time. But I don't know, I'm going to ask you, I don't know that you need the same level of coverage, 8 stations for a medical response. I mean, I think there's a plan in the future that you're going to pursue, but do we ever get to a point where we're not rolling out a whole crew and a fire truck to be the first responder and just a stabilizing responder at that, I think, for a medical response, but there's a better method to address that, where what's rolling out isn't the version of $3 million of one station's worth of asset to go to a medical response. Does that question make sense? It's just what strikes me is the disparity between fire for a fire station and medical.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, this is a question that is universally asked. And the question is, and it's asked a lot of different ways. Why does a fire engine go to a medical call? Do you really need a fire engine to go to a medical call? And there's a couple of thoughts around that. One, I like to explain to folks that look at your standard fire engine crew, 3-person crew, as kind of the Swiss Army knife. It's that vehicle, that apparatus is designed to do a little bit of everything. A medical call, respond to a fire alarm, respond to a rescue, a vehicle accident, respond to a vegetation, wildland, or structure fire, go to hazardous materials call. We never quite know what call is going to occur at any given moment. So we need to have a vehicle that has that, sort of all those things built into it, kind of your standard utility Swiss Army knife. The second piece is, can we respond differently to calls? And the answer is absolutely yes. And there's things that we're currently doing that have already positioned us to do that. One, the way we manage the 911 call. We prioritize all of these calls. Right now, we go to a lot of these calls, just code 2, no lights and siren. And we do that because it's not a high priority need to get somebody there, in 6 minutes or less, 8 minutes or less, 90% of the time. So we're already doing that. The next step in that evolution would be to, okay, in these types of calls where it's low acuity, not serious, they don't need an ambulance, they don't need a fire engine, they need somebody in a sport utility vehicle that can go out and assess them and determine, not only do you not need a fire engine or an ambulance, you don't even need to go to the emergency room. We're going to get you an urgent care appointment, and we're going to do that. The next step is putting telemedicine within your 911 center. We're working on that project statewide right now, and we'd like to move that forward where we don't even dispatch anybody. We've got somebody that can triage that call out of the 911 system and do much the same thing as I just described. You need to go to urgent care. COVID has opened a lot of these opportunities that we have been working on, thinking about, and debating for years. And much like the council took action on State Street yesterday to do things differently, we're looking at this very same opportunity that can we rethink how we deliver services. That is probably a multi-year project to do that. Lots of us fire chiefs are talking about that right now, working with the county EMS office to think about responding differently. That could create that scenario where, gee, maybe we don't need a 3-person engine crew, we need a 2-person, or we need an extra vehicle floating around in the day in place of station coverage during the day, those types of things. So we're open and are looking at all of those.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome, Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Both my colleagues asked many of the questions I had, so I'll just have a couple more follow-up. One on the Wildfire Community Protection Plan that's being updated right now. You mentioned that there is an extended deadline. Can you speak to the new deadline? And then there is some information on mapping that has been a major issue, especially in areas that have been included, and there's an online tool. If you could just speak to that to clarify what action you've taken to extend and provide this new tool.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, great question. So when we move forward with the CWPP, as you are all aware, we were on a very aggressive timeline, and this was all obviously pre-COVID. We did our first community meeting that was really quite well attended with about 70 or 80 community members. I believe you were attended the first one in person. We had to do the second one virtually. We had about 45 attendees on that one. The mayor was part of that one. And we had an initial comment period that was set to end this Friday. We have extended that out to the first Friday in June. I want to say it's the 2nd, but it's that first Friday in June. We've given the community 2 additional weeks to comment on that. We've had very robust discussions and comments and questions, and we really attribute that to the outreach that we've done and our press releases, our social media outreach, the separate city webpage for the CWPP, the draft CWPP. I think the biggest concerns that we're hearing out there right now is we have a few parcels that were for some reason not included in the high or extreme hazard zones, that when you go back and take a look at them now and seeing how the fires are burning, absolutely need to be included. That led us to a challenge with some of the original mapping capabilities that we had through our consultant and their map. And some of the community members were trying to get in and zoom in on this map and couldn't actually, zoom it in close enough on that parcel. And this is where I give a huge shout out to the city's IT team, and especially the GIS team. Literally, they turned this thing around in under 24 hours and put together a new GIS map that with the city platform that a community member can go in and type in their address and zoom right in to see their parcel and is it in, is it not in? And so that is all included on the updated webpage, the CWPP.Santa Barbara webpage. So now they can go in and do that. So we're hoping that these 2 things in conjunction, these were the concerns we heard initially. One, can we extend the period a little bit for some more comment, given COVID or the inability to get to another community meeting? And then can we search a better map? And because the city's IT team stepped up, we were able to accomplish those really quite quickly. We've got a press release going out today. I sent you all the updated information yesterday, council members via email. So we think we're on a really good space.
And a follow-up, thank you for all that in our IT department and really being responsive to the constituents that have commented in the last couple of weeks. A follow-up question I received very recently from a constituent relates to those who might not be have technological ability to comment on it. And is there an opportunity? I know we're in COVID as we come out of it, to have a community meeting, but perhaps extend the public comment period even further till we might be able to have a community meeting. And really the population that would be affected are some of our more senior citizens or others. But my understanding is there might also be some grant deadlines that we have to abide by. So if you could speak to that, if there would be a possibility of extending it beyond June 5th, or if there's grant deadlines and how that would work.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman. Yes, so I think first with the community member, if they're concerned about the technology, if they can use a telephone or send us an email, we can absolutely spend time with them. Amber Anderson, who is the fire department's project lead on that, has been spending really most of her work week talking to these individuals one-on-one. And so if they're uncomfortable coming, the reality is I don't think we're going to be able to schedule a public in-person session. The challenge that we're also facing are these grant deadlines. To do a satisfactory EIR that is not going to get challenged typically takes 12 months. We have to be done with this grant by essentially the end of March in 2021. So we're already 2 months short of the 12 months that we need if this thing were to get challenged, go sideways for any reason. When we accepted the grant from CAL FIRE, we also accepted their timeline, and we get that this was pre-COVID shutdown. And in order to change that, we would have to go back to the legislature and have them change the deadline. Now, if we are getting close, say like January, February of next year, we may want to go back and petition. I saw that the governor, by executive order, had made some changes to some other environmental or energy grant funding. Perhaps there's an opportunity to do that. We think with this short extension, we're still going to be able to get it done, but I'm fearful of putting the city in a position where fast forward a year from now, CAL FIRE says you didn't make the deadline. One, we're not giving you that 185,000, and you got to refund the 145 we just gave you. So
and they wouldn't give the extension at that point. That's the other risk. We'd be at the risk of them not giving the extension, and we wouldn't know until that time.
Correct.
That's very, very helpful. I wanted to articulate that, and that's good information for us to know as council members that you would be able to do telephone and spend that extra additional time over these 2 weeks with anybody who has that.
Absolutely. Have them call us. That we're happy to do that. That's what we're here for.
And so I don't mean to be cutting you. It's kind of a new format here on the back and forth, but I have one final question. It's kind of a follow-up on to Councilmember Jordan about relooking at services or efficiencies. Can you speak, and you given a presentation a few months back on the emergency 911 system that we were looking at with the county for efficiencies, and just is that being put off? I know it wasn't in this fiscal year. I think it was the next fiscal year, but due to COVID, is there been any discussion, or is that still off in the future and we'll have to delay it?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, these projects are still moving forward. So there's 2 specific projects that were in your question. One is the regional fire EMS dispatch, and 2 is having the fire service be one of the bidders to operate the ambulance transportation system within this county. Obviously, COVID has set everybody back by a month or 2. Our energies have been focused in other areas, but we're still moving forward on that. It is still my stated goal, my stated mission to get us into a regional fire dispatch center. ultimately the question is how are we going to pay for it? And how do we pay for it in a time where everybody's tightening their belt? But these projects continue to move forward. You know, the city council, you know, went on record as a matter of policy, we want to be part of this. You've directed me to go negotiate a contract with the county fire department to see, you know, what the cost in terms of the contract would be. And we currently are still pursuing that.
Great, thank you. I look forward to when that comes back to us later, maybe later this year, hopefully. So thank you very much, Chief Nickel. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank Specialist Anderson for her work on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan update. I know she's been putting a lot of effort into that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Friedman. Are there any other city council members with questions for our fire chief? Well, Chief, or questions or comments at this point, because we don't have any public comment speakers. And I was thinking that we could move to police and then finance and then take public comment. Okay, Chief, we're gonna thank you for your good work and move on to the close the fire discussion and go to police. People, our staff members ready. There's our police chief, Lori Luno. Welcome, Chief.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. Today I am here with my command staff. You will be seeing them pop up shortly, and along with our business manager to present our recommended budget for fiscal year 2021, which, as you know, these were all submitted prior to the economic impacts of the COVID-19 virus. But just before we get started, as a reminder, our police department functions to provide basic social services, maintain order, and control crime. We are primarily a service-oriented department, which means we rely very heavily on our very dedicated and talented employees that do amazing things 24/7. Many factors mitigate our day-to-day priorities, whether it be fire, floods, and crime incidents, and as we all know now, even a pandemic. But through it all, we know that it's our relationship with the community and meeting their needs that defines our success. So moving on to our presentation, it's a similar outline. You will see our department overview and organizational chart, as well as our divisional information. You will receive our proposed budget, our potential budgetary impacts from COVID-19 that come along with our budget reduction measures that we suggest, as well as our measurable and project objectives with P3. So I am going to first turn this over to Captain Mary Linda Arroyo, who will give you our department overview.
Thank you, Chief. I'll start with the organizational chart. As I'm sure you all have seen before, the chief's on the top. We have three main divisions. It's our field operations or patrol, criminal investigations, and internal operations, which is the investigative division, and then strategic operations and personnel, where we do the hiring and the special events, animal control, and things along those nature. We have 15 programs, 5 funds. We are personnel heavy with obviously 211 full-time employees, 141 of them sworn peace officers. So next slide. Our divisional staffing and departmental staffing, as you can see, 56% or 117 are in field operations or patrol, followed by the criminal investigations and internal operations, strategic operations, and then the chief staff. Next slide. Within those divisions, next slide, strategic operations and personnel division, responsible for strategic planning of the department and each in the individual divisions as far as personnel processing, financial tracking, the business office, and reporting. Our programs include everything from training, recruitment, wellness, business office, information technologies, range. I'm gonna come down here. Sorry about that. There we go. Crime lab, or I'm sorry, special events and animal control. Animal control is 24/7 throughout the city. The next is the criminal investigation and internal operations, responsible for all, obviously, criminal investigations, combined communication center or dispatch, and records management. Those programs are investigative division, our evidence property room, crime lab and forensics, records, and dispatch combined communication center. Next slide. And the largest, again, division is our patrol or field operations for all calls for service and enforcement of public safety laws. That includes patrol, motors and traffic, drinking and driving team, street crimes, community and media relations, special enforcement teams, parking enforcement, beat coordinators, PAL, and explorers. So I will turn it over for our proposed FY21 plan to our business manager, Lori Peterson.
Good afternoon, Lori Peterson, Business Manager at the Police Department. I'm going to present our proposed budget as it was submitted, and then the chief will talk about some of our reduction strategies going off of this budget. The Police Department original budget was $47.7 million, comprised of 3 major funds, and those are shown here on this slide, with $42.6 million coming from the general fund subsidy. Then departmental revenue is made up of $4.5 million. And then with some state funding, miscellaneous grants, and equipment funds, we have about another $600,000 in revenues in our department. Next slide, please. The proposed general fund expenditures are shown on this slide as the fire department discussed and other departments. The majority of our expense is in salaries and benefits, with 88% of it comprised for our expenditures. Supplies and services are about $3.1 million, and allocated costs at about $2.4 million. And then we have some minor special projects and non-capital items, which are our K-9 fund, which is our special project. And then non-capital includes our computer software purchases and hardware purchases for the year. Next slide. The proposed expenditures, again, are highlighted here and broken down. The increase for the department for fiscal year 21 is approximately $130,000 from the original proposed budget. You can see that a lot of that is in salaries and benefits. And then in the supplies and services section, we reduced our expenditures in that area in order to meet budget, and allocated costs increased by almost $60,000 for the department. And those are the citywide expenses that we share in. We have some minor special projects. Again, that's the K-9 fund, and the other is our computer purchases. Next slide. So to get to our expenditures, our proposed revenues for the department are made up of these categories before you. The majority of the revenue comes from parking violations. And you can see that that was originally estimated at about $2.3 million. And what we need to remember with parking violations is that the money comes in through the parking with the payment of the citation, but the state has its related fees as well, that it takes $12.50 off of that. And then we share with other departments for the street sweeping program. And we also pay the DMV in order to put a site on hold on a registration. So there are some other fees that go out and are due with the collection. Service charges have to do with the fees that we charge people to come in for live scans, reports, and other items in that area. So that comprises about $900,000. Internal transfers is the street sweeping program, the half-cent sales tax that matches with the fire department's originally estimated at $320,000. The department also receives revenue from other agencies that participate in our joint powers agreement, and that helps to pay for salaries. And then we have some miscellaneous revenues that come in along with property forfeiture. Permits and licenses include things like dog licenses, alarm fees, taxi cabs. That's all in that category. And then we have fines and donations at the bottom for a total of $4.5 million. Next slide. Here's how the pie looks. Again, you can see the majority of the revenue coming in with parking violations. And the next slide. So as we went forward and looked at the possible impacts related to COVID, next slide, we have to take into consideration those same categories. It's hard to project at this point what those impacts will be. Parking violations, at this point, we have not been enforcing time zones. Residential areas have been open as people are required to stay home, so we're not enforcing those. So once we get back up and running more towards normal business, we'll see what the actual impact is. Service charges, we're having less people come in. We're not doing live scans, so we're going to see reduction in those fees. Half-cent sales tax, that has gone down as well. And permits and licenses, that area is one area where we're not seeing as big of a reduction at this time because people are still needing to pay for their annual alarm permits and dog licenses. And fines may be an area where we also see some reduced revenue. The things that, much like the fire department, we've incurred additional expenses, personal protective equipment, the cleaning, disinfecting supplies, and then we had to make some purchases of laptops in order to meet our security requirements for people to telecommute from home. So the next slide talks about, of these expenses that we have incurred, we took the opportunity to apply for a grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and it was for $85,000. And we included the fire department and public works as part of that effort. We put in about $30,000 of our own expenses, about $40,000 for the fire department, and just under $20,000 for public works. And so we anticipate that we should receive the full value of that grant, and those monies will come back to those departments and the general fund. Next slide. And then I'm going to hand this off to the chief, and she can talk about our budget reduction strategies.
Thank you, Lori. So like other departments, we were asked to come in with a projected 5% reduction strategy. And we, exactly like the fire department, are sitting at 88% of our department budget associated with personnel, salaries and benefits. So the only two areas we have to really carve out any savings would be from that area and then our supplies and services. However, our supplies and services total about $3.1 million, and the things that we need to do with those are essential services, the contract with animal control, our sexual assault exams, and some of the mental health assessments. Also, the equipment that we buy from that fund is essential. It's our ammunition, it's our bulletproof vests, and the things that we need and are required to use to perform our function. So as you can see, our recommendations include starting with those positions we already have let go. Those are our hourly employees. We had 18 of them with the police department. And the greatest impact with losing those positions will probably be felt at our front counter. We will likely have to move to some level of service reduction with either hours or days of the week. We're not exactly sure what it's going to look like since this is a projection, but we will have to mitigate that loss for sure. One of the positions that also will be lost is our SNAP officers with hourly positions. As you know, those were from student employees that typically came in every fall. We're in the position right now that City College looks like they're also going to continue with online services. So this would mean we would be still able to enforce the noise municipal code with administrative violations, but it would be with police officers and not our student outreach employees, if you will. So we look to our other positions that we currently have open primarily to find that $2.3 million 5% savings, which means freezing an open administrative specialist position from our business office, 3 police officer positions, 2 sergeant positions, and 1 open lieutenant positions. So we were faced with a dilemma last October in regards to knowing that we were going to have 20 of our employees in some level of training and not available to hit the streets and actually do the job we need. So as an organization, we created a strategic plan to address patrol staffing and our policing in general. With that, we already decided we needed to freeze those supervisory and leadership positions because every promotion would mean we would need to backfill with patrol. And since we didn't have those 20 people needing direct supervision because they were in training, that was an acceptable position for us to put off for a little while. So those positions have been open since pretty much December of 19, and we feel with those positions continuing to be open, we will be able to manage as we have been doing to the best of our abilities. Also, we have our next police academy slated for October. We have 2 employees that were gonna be slotted for the April academy that was put on hold. So we've already hired them. We just hired a lateral employee. So our goal is to hire another 5 for October that we're anticipating launching as scheduled. Knowing that the salaries start July 1 in our budget, knowing the academy starts October, we have a savings of about $135,000 because of that delay in training and needing to fill those positions. So from our contracts, we recognize that the county has stood up a very comprehensive sobering center due to some Prop 47 grant funds. They have opened that center available to all law enforcement agencies in the county. And with that being a resource, we decided that we would not continue with our current contract of our sobering center downtown. And that on an annual basis will save us $267,000. And then we move forward to our major event staffing. We already know that our 4th of July events are not going to occur. Most of our staffing is surrounding parades and things of that nature. If the COVID pandemic continues to reduce large-scale events, we're able to potentially find some additional approximately $344,000 of savings from that, bringing our recommended 5% budget reduction strategy to that $2.3 million. So next slide, please. With that, I'd like to introduce Captain Todd Stoney, who will discuss our key initiatives.
Madam Mayor, council members, good afternoon. Our key initiatives are essentially the focus of our community policing efforts and how we set the priorities for the department throughout the year. The first focus that we have is develop our community policing strategies to address the problems of crime, traffic, and quality of life issues. Next, we continue our youth outreach to the Police Activities PAL and Santa Barbara Police Department's Explorer Post. And I'm happy to say that despite the social distancing, we have been able to keep our youth involved through some of our virtual workshops. And I commend those who have worked on that to provide that opportunity for the youth in our community. Third, we want to continue our collaborative efforts with outside agencies. This is for intelligence gathering and enforcement to address gang and youth violence. And finally, We need to continue our recruitment, retention, and hiring efforts for the department. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Captain Altavilla.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. Alex Altavilla, Captain with the Police Department. I'm going to go ahead and go over our P3 measurable and project objectives. The Police Department for FY21 has 93 P3 measurable and project objectives. I'm going to try to go ahead and give you a concise, balanced snapshot specifically of our P3 core mission and community engagement projects. The first one, which is our main point of contact for customer service, is our Combined Communication Center, which is led by the Police Department. And one of the main objectives is to go ahead and answer all 911 calls within an average of 5 seconds. The next one is, again, our response field operations to, again, customer service in the field, which is maintain a response time below 7 minutes for all priority 1 calls for service, which typically are classified as those calls for service that could cause injury or death. Next slide. This next one speaks to our investigative division. When a case is assigned to a detective, to be able to go ahead and complete 81% of our cases within 90 days of follow-up assigned to an investigator. And then also on the flip side, we need to go ahead and make sure that we maintain our staffing. So the next one is to maintain 95% of staffing levels authorized for full-time positions, because we typically, on average, throughout the years, lose about 7 officers a year. Next slide. One of the projects that's important that we're going to go ahead and roll out here is the implement text to 911. Right now, community can go ahead and actually call on the phone, but now they'll be able to go ahead and actually text if for some reason they're in a position where they can't actually verbally go ahead and tell us what the issue is, specifically like a domestic situation. Another one that we're continuing to go ahead and work on is our transparency initiatives with the community employees. And this one speaks specifically to complaints that we have to go ahead and investigate regarding allegations of officer conduct. And then ensuring 100% of our Public Records Act requests are responded to within 10 days. Again, that's another transparent initiative to go ahead and make sure that we're responsive to the public. Another one to be able to go ahead and give the community some good data is to be able to go ahead and provide them with a mapping portal, which will be on our webpage. We currently have one there now, but this one will be a little bit more robust for them to go ahead and use. And then the final one is to go ahead and continue to plan and coordinate the network infrastructure technology-wise for the new police building. That concludes our presentation, and our team here is now available for any questions that you might have.
Thanks. You had a lot there, and I'm looking through the budget binder, and the police department sheets just go on and on. You all do so much. So, Mr. Friedman, questions, please?
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing in the presentation. I just have a few questions. One of them was on page D87, and you were referencing the staffing levels, and that we typically have about 7 officers per year that transition out either through retirement or going to other agencies. What is our replacement level? Because I know that it does take upwards of a year to have new hires come in through the academy and whatnot. Are we keeping par with that? And especially right now related to COVID and these few months. So I just wanted to check on our coming in as they're going out, what the numbers are.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, we have 7 current trainees that graduated the police academy right when the pandemic kicked off. They're hitting the streets for their field training. We had a academy worth of 12 that started to originally. So we saw some attrition in that academy, but we've continued to push on. We have 11 openings at this current time. A year ago, we overfilled our positions. So it's one of those dynamic numbers. But what we did is we put a full-time sergeant and a lieutenant in charge of recruiting. Unfortunately, for economic circumstances, we will not have a recruiting problem in the near future. We confirmed with HR that we have tons of applications in the pipeline. We are continuing on with some social distance testing for June to keep the machine rolling, knowing that some of like our physical abilities test will end up getting pushed to a different time of the process where we can make sure we can keep distance and keep the numbers more reduced. But in saying that, our staffing has been actually pretty solid. We had one employee that was positive for COVID. We've kept our others safe. We found a bunch of people that had vacation plans, have canceled those and have actually been to work. So we are in good shape overall.
Well, thank you. That's encouraging, and especially that we have a significant number of applications coming up. Because I know there's a lot of retirements coming in over the next, we're in the middle of it and coming up in the next few years. So that's very encouraging. Just a couple more questions. One is related on page D91. The first is related to homeless and cleanups of the camps in particular. We were at 40 was the 40, and then 58 for this year was the adopted, and we're looking at 40 next year. Are there going to be any service level impacts related to the potential to be addressing cleanups as they need to occur? I know there's public safety and public health issues. So is there going to be impacts to that due to any proposed reductions in the budget?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, we have shifted to environmental services being more on the front line for our camp cleanups. And we assist with those as a security benefit to them, and we work cohesively with them. So I think those actual line items are going to be presented in their budget. But from our perspective, no, we have the personnel, and that's the part of the budget that we've always managed camp cleanups with.
Okay, perfect. I just want to clarify there from your end, there wasn't going to be any issues. I know from environmental services, they've kind of talked about that already. And then part of the, speaking of homeless issues, is I do want to congratulate all of our staff. I know the police department as well as our mental health and public health and others, CityNet, that we had 61 homeless last year that we were able to transition into programming, along with 68 that were reunited with family or other members. So are we able to still continue that level of service from the police department's outreach efforts that are a part of that, or are there going to be impacts to that, your component of that whole team?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, I think now is the time to re-examine the resources we have now from the city as a whole. The CityNet outreach work, as well as the great work we've been seeing from SB Act. We have a model that's working really well with them doing some outreach first and us following up. When we look at what's to come, we don't know if the courts are still going to have a restorative court. I'm afraid we're going to have to shift some resources to maybe some more mental illness response, if you will, and look at more of the partnering with behavioral wellness for the co-response as a priority as we continue to move on through this pandemic. So we will always have officers on the street. We will always have some outreach efforts, but I think it's going to be coordinated in a different way because we still have those other resources, and we've got a great model that I think is operating well for all of us.
Well, that's great news. I appreciate that, because now we're able to really strategically use our resources as we know we're going into a time of more limited, but to still provide that service to connect those on the streets to the proper services, which ultimately saves all of costs in the long run. My last question is also from page D91. It gets to the level of service, but just wanted to get your take on calls for domestic violence, child abuse, and those things during the pandemic. Have those gone up? And I read in an article nationwide, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the reported cases of child abuse have actually gone down, in some cases as much as 50%, but the actual numbers are probably increasing for a number of reasons. But so what has been your just assessment of that, and then how are we able to respond to that? Is there an increase or decrease, and what do we expect going forward, at least the next few months as we're in this transition time?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, I saw some statistics from police chiefs in California, and it was about 35 of the agencies, I should say 35% of the agencies that were actually seeing an increase in reported domestic violence incidents. And that's been our case. We have not seen the increase. It's pretty much status quo. I can say anecdotally, we've had a few more calls over the last couple weeks. I don't know if that's because maybe some people are starting to get out a little more, but we're continuing to have a great relationship with the district attorney's office. There was some online training that was given. Our officers will continue to respond and offer the resources they do. We're hopeful we don't see a big increase, but we are here just in case they do. But in the meantime, we do have other mechanisms for people to reach out through friends and whatnot for help should they need it. And we've been really good, I think, at articulating that. I see my captain in the back. We have an incident in front of our station occurring right now that's an active incident for us. So I'm watching that with one eye, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did that. We're monitoring, we're responding. We have the resources to respond because it is different than a typical because of all this. So thank you very much for all you and your department are doing, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Chief. I echo Councilmember Friedman's appreciation. This is super informative, and we're so grateful for all that you and your officers do. I just have one quick question. On slide, I can't read the number, but the slide about the budget reduction measures, one of the positions that looks like it'll be reduced is the restorative court liaison position. And I know you mentioned previously that we don't even know whether restorative court will be available as an option, but assuming that it is, can you just explain to us a little bit about what that reduction will mean? I assume it doesn't mean that we will be doing less diversion to restorative court, but what is the absence of that position mean for folks that are being diverted that direction?
Thank you, Councilmember Harmon. Mayor Murillo, we had a civilian employee in that position part-time that helped with the case management of the cases that we took to restorative court. So I think now's the time, if restorative court continues to occur, we look at, is it gonna look the same? And is our engagement gonna be the same? I think the resources are gonna be there, the diversion's gonna be there. It's how are we gonna manage all the cases that we bring forward? So it's one of those that if it continues and we see an abundance, it's an hourly position that we can bring back and adjust likely in the long run. So I think we have some flexibility because of that hourly status.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to confirm, so long, of course, bracketing that it may not even be available, but assuming that it is, I just want to make sure that doesn't mean that we'll use that path less just because we don't have that position. That's true, right? We'll still use it as necessary.
Absolutely. We realize our criminal courts are not the answer for most of our nuisance related crimes. So it's a valuable resource should it exist.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chief. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thanks. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief, for your service and everything you do. I'm going to grill you on a couple questions here, but I think you can handle. Can you describe in detail how, as a department, you have implemented community policing? For example, how many officers or staff you have dedicated to these efforts, and what duties and programs are they in charge of?
Councilmember Gutierrez, Madam Mayor, I want to say every single officer we hire gets hired under the philosophy that they are going to implement community-oriented policing. It's a philosophy. So what we have in regards to beat coordinators which is what a lot of people identify that philosophy with. We have one right now that responds as the main coordinator of distributing community complaints directly to teams when those times and areas align with certain patrol hours and positions. So I think all of our community engagement efforts, from our communication plans to my chief's advisory panel, to our Fire and Police Commission, all of it, the closer we can get to the community, and I like to view us as a part of the community, which is a part of that philosophy. It's all of it. So it's not just a program. So we can say our PAL engagement is one of the programs that we are able to connect with our youth and operate under that philosophy. But to me, I mean, it's a philosophy I was brought up in my policing, and it means that we listen to our community and we police according to their priorities, because we necessarily are not seeing it from their level. So the more we can get out and engage our community. One of the great programs we have is our Voices program, which creates a opportunity for mostly our new officers to sit down with several different community groups and have a bilateral exchange of information. And it's in plain clothes, where our officers are sitting down, breaking bread, and hearing directly from people how they like to be addressed, what their fears are with the police department, and things of that nature.
Cool. You might have touched on this a little bit already, but how many beat coordinators do you have, and how are you planning on, or how have you implemented them during this pandemic and after this pandemic?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, so back in October, because we recognized we were going to have some staffing challenges, knowing we had 20 of our officers in some level of training, we pulled all the specialty positions that we had basically back to the patrol ranks. And we identified one person as our lead beat coordinator, who is our person that coordinates some of the broader requests, whether it be for neighborhood outreach or speed complaints. And that that officer is in charge of distributing those community concerns at the team level to a sergeant and a team that's going to be responsive. Okay. So just one to answer your question right now.
Okay. Is there any way we can help you get more?
Councilmember Gutierrez, it's a matter of feeling that we have the staffing to provide that extra level of commitment. It doesn't mean we can't carve out duties along the way with assigning somebody to go work a neighborhood watch meeting. It just means for having a full-time officer for their entire work week may be hampered. So it's one of those things that we value, and it's a matter of getting the personnel ready to go through training. So we're still in that position with our open positions and the ones in training that we're probably seeing 20 less officers available for patrol services right now than we'd like to see.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I been getting a lot of requests or a lot of comments about having more police officers present in the neighborhoods and such, especially in the 1st and 3rd district. But I know a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and having to respond to urgent calls. So I have to thank you for your answers and your time.
And Councilmember Gutierrez, I know I mentioned before, and I hope you heard that when the pandemic started, we did allocate 2 of our officers that were proficient in Spanish speaking to get out and be that connection to the community to help educate people on social distancing and safety measures. So that's an example of how we can continue to keep those measures moving forward under new challenges.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, thank you so much for all your work and the whole department. I do want to highlight that the text message has worked very nicely, especially in my district. I've heard a lot of really positive feedback, and it's actually saved lives. So thank you so much for updating that technology with the 911 calls. Just for the community to get a little bit more educated, can you explain how the police department supports the PAL program and how you guys work together? And then my second question is on the collaboration with outside efforts on gang and youth violence. Can you talk about just briefly some of the organizations that you guys have been working with and just highlight some of those things that you have achieved from these collaborations? Thank you.
Absolutely. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez. First of all, our PAL program is something that we support by way of engaging the youth. We have several officers that stop by, that assist with day-to-day activities. I know one of our officers coordinated for example, a graduation gift drive to the graduating seniors from PAL, and police officers donated money for gift cards to make sure we could make those graduations special. So we sponsor the holiday dinner in regards to staff is there to serve the meals. We help lead their Explorer program and all sorts of day-to-day activities when they felt that we would have an opportunity to be a benefit, a great role model. And that meant just day-to-day stop-ins by our officers to say hi to the youth. So it's a program that we've seen great success. I know they're continuing with some online services at this time. Their tutoring is something that is very needed and probably the most critical service, I think, to our youth in the community. But it's just, they've done amazing things. And when you look at the quality of child, I should say, that moves on and goes to college, it's impressive. And I've been able to hear some of those leadership talks, and it's a great service and something we'll continue to support. So secondly, we have attended the South Coast Youth Safety meetings, and we have embedded ourselves with some more collaborative efforts. We have some youth service officers that work from specifically the prevention piece of it and enforcement piece of tackling some of our youth violence. So we're very engaged on a day-to-day basis doing the things that we are most able to facilitate. But in saying that, we recognize we have to have the collaborative approach with other agencies and entities that do the specific prevention and outreach. So to put it most similar, I should say most consistently and succinctly, is that we collaborate and work in partnership for all of those pieces to ensure that there's a violence reduction.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just quickly, so many thorough questions from my colleagues that they're great, and I just want to express my appreciation. I am very concerned about these 11 openings and holding these positions open. Again, I know it varies by department, a position open in one certain thing or another. And I'm just looking for maybe a very straightforward response to how much that affects our ability to address the needs of our community. To be short so many officers, that is troubling to me. So maybe just a comment on that, and then I have another quick question after that.
Madam Mayor, Council Member Sneddon, it's something that we don't want to get behind in regards to hiring, knowing it takes probably 6 months to get somebody hired and through our process, and then another year before they're fully functioning on the streets alone. So when you look at our average attrition, it's about 7 for the year. So we know that we've had that from time to time, but when you pair it with potential injuries or some unplanned leaves, that's when it becomes critical to some of our levels of service to provide. So there's a big unknown from day to day what our functional staffing will look like, and what we have available to us, like the fire department, is overtime to bring somebody in to maintain certain levels of service. And it's actually a little cheaper to pay the overtime and bring in the extra body than the additional roll-up costs associated with benefits. So there may be an ability to get more efficient with services. For example, during the COVID pandemic so far, we've directed more people to online resources and been able to utilize maybe some injured employees to take reports over the phone. Hopefully that won't go away, and we can continue to do those types of things when it's applicable, and therefore build some more capacity with the people that we do have.
And then have you had officers who have tested positive or have had to quarantine? How much of an impact has that had on your daily force who's able to be out there?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, we did have one employee that was off work and COVID positive. And then we had a exposure that created 3 separate quarantines at the same time. I want to say, fortunately, right now, we've seen still a little reduction in calls for service. So with those losses, we've been able to adjust and get through the day and not see a service level impact. But I'm happy to say that those quarantined officers have come back to work and they are healthy, and as well as our officer that had COVID. So we are looking good at this time.
And so then what are you doing? Like when you go on calls, do you have to fully mask up, or full, how extensive is the protection that you have to provide for yourselves before addressing a call?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, we did put out a special order that directs our employees to have their N95 masks with them when they make contact on calls and engage somebody. We also directed them to put those masks on any potential suspect that they end up arresting, which will reduce any aerosol. They have protective gear in their cars, depending on the nature of the call, where they may fully suit up. They have goggles. We have pretty strict standards, health check standards when coming into the station that we want them to follow. But the one thing I always say is we manage that with critical incidents. So I don't want them to forget about their own safety and immediate needs, and when they need that first, meaning, you know, they may have to go to a personal protection device before the N95, knowing that that is a device, but those critical incidents occur. So it's always a balance.
And Madam Mayor and Councilmember Sneddon, if I could pop in and the chief can elaborate some more. I was very impressed with the police department's early adoption of a lot of operational changes to protect the safety of the employees, knowing full well that we need to maintain a healthy police force during this time. So shift changes, having bigger gaps, work units separating out more, just trying that if we did have an exposure to limit the extent that it might potentially spread within the department. They were a very early adopter of some really state-of-the-art practices that I was quite impressed with. And I don't know if the chief wanted to elaborate any more on that.
Thank you, Paul. Actually, Councilmember Sneddon, I will say the reason we were able to do that is because we have a good relationship with our fire department. And I feel for my colleagues across the nation that don't have that relationship, because they get it from Department of Health. They're the infectious disease experts compared to us. So we worked in concert and basically stole their plans that they shared with us. And it helped us. We have every other week, we have conference calls with their medical doctor, and it's open for questions. He's reached out to our employees when we've had exposures to make sure we're at least educated to the best of our ability, and we're doing what we can to mitigate those exposures.
To look out for yourselves. We need you. Yeah.
Well, and frankly, the community, we recognize that we also can be carriers to the community if we don't protect ourselves as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And I've one more question, just reading here, it's on D95 about, the citizen crime mapping portal. Could you just tell us more about that through, I don't know how to say that, Accurate Virtual Crime Center? And is that something that's available now to the community, or how do we use that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, we're close on it, but it is a robust system it's great for our officers because they get to access public data actually throughout the United States, but there's this component for the community that is much more extensive than we have now. So many of those calls that we get and requests that our beat coordinators get for statistics, people can easily find them themselves. So it's going to be great for all of us once it comes online. I think it's just been a little stalled out due to COVID, but we're really close.
That's fantastic. I think, so many people report things on Nextdoor neighborhood or on their Facebook page. And I'm always saying, report it to the police, not just internally, but this gives a way for people so they could then, a citizen could also report crime on there, or no? Is it just to look at data?
Councilmember Sneddon, it's just to review the data, but we do have our online reporting system in English and Spanish that they can report crime.
Okay. And then one last question, just to what extent are you able to work with the ambassadors or the red shirts, or how is that program in conjunction with what's happening with the budget, and what are different ways that can still be utilized?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sneddon, I believe that program got moved over to downtown parking. So we're in touch with them. They have radios to access us. So all of it is a team approach. And as we move through this, I know over the next week, we're going to be closely embedded with the eyes and the ears on the street in a different way, trying to make sure we can do what we can to keep our community moving forward to reopening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alejandra Gutierrez, another question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a quick question. Going back to the slide where you talk about that annually you have 7 officers that end up leaving the department. My question is, I know Mr. Friedman talked about they're either retiring, but are some of those that are leaving the retirement, are they leaving because the city is too expensive and they can't afford to live here?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, I am racking my brain right now, and I can't think of anybody that is left in the last year for another police agency. So we've had several, that attrition incorporates some people that don't pass our training. There's some people that recognize this isn't the profession they thought it was, as well as our retirees. So it encompasses all of those. And I right now can't identify anybody in the recent future that has left for another agency or because they said they can't afford to be in our community. In fact, the number we have is about, I believe, 30 to 35 of our police officers or employees are in this general region.
Like they live within the county?
Within the county, pretty much from, that would be from Goleta to Carp for that 30%, I believe. So for the most part, our people are already commuting in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oscar Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks again, Chief. I just would like a little clarification. When I believe you said earlier that community policing had decreased a bit before COVID, is that right?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, I will argue that we haven't decreased community policing because that is a philosophy. I hire our officers understanding that philosophy. They're trained with that philosophy. It is a function of their everyday, which means we put the community first. So what we did do is we rolled back 2 of our additional beat coordinators back to patrol as a primary function. So it was we were left with the 1 beat coordinator to handle all the coordinating efforts for Neighborhood Watch, to be the repository for some community complaints, with the expectation that that officer was then going to push it out to other officers to manage.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments for the chief? Thanks so much. We'll close the police department, and grateful to all your staff who participated today. Thank you, everyone. And I'm trying to figure out, Mr. Casey, if we should take a break, unless we think, okay, let's keep going, because we can be time efficient. And finance department, if you're ready to go, we're happy to have you, Mr. Bodette. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. I'm Brandon Bodette, Budget Manager. I am joined today by Jennifer Tomaszewski, the Interim Finance Director, as well as Mark Howard, our Risk Manager, to present the Finance Department's recommended budget for fiscal year 2021. Next slide. So the Finance Department is a strong team. We have a relatively small staff, but provide a high output of work. The department has 16 programs, 2 funds, and close to 40 FTEs. Today's presentation, immediately following, we'll be concentrating on the general fund portion of the finance department. Mr. Howard will immediately follow us with his presentation on the self-insurance fund. So the information directly following will be related to the general fund, which incorporates accounting, budget, treasury, and his general services divisions. So as a outline, we'll be going over, I'll start with a department overview. I'll provide what we do and give you some performance metrics. And then Ms. Tomaszewski will join and give a financial overview, as well as budget impacts. So I'm gonna start with the Treasury Division, and I realize this is a really busy slide, but that's by design. We're a back of the house operation, and we don't often get an opportunity to highlight all the hard work that we do. So I'm trying to visually show just how much we do. The Treasury Division specifically handles some very important things. We manage the investment portfolio. We're responsible for revenue forecasting for the large general fund, non-departmental revenues like sales tax and TOT. The division manages the city banking contract, as well as ensuring that the citywide we adhere to credit card PCI compliance. The division does a lot of volume of work. They're processing over 140,000 revenue transactions, as well as preparing 355,000 utility bills annually. Next slide. So here's some performance highlights for the Treasury Division, and these are really indicative of how we service both internal customers as well as external customers. The division processes 99% of their treasury receipts that they receive from the other departments daily. They helped our utility billing customers. A third of them have opted for paperless billing. And the division did a really commendable job of coordinating alternative payment methods for the public during our recent stay-at-home orders. Next slide. Next is our accounting division. This is another busy division with a busy slide. They have they will provide oversight and accounting for all the departments. This is a big responsibility. They prepare all the regulatory requirements for city, state, and federal reports. This includes the comprehensive annual financial report as well as the single audit. They also, in recent years, have been really busy doing the FEMA reporting requirements. Next slide. As well as the accounting services, the division also has accounts payable and payroll functions. To give you a sense of the magnitude of the work that our payroll division does, we use a metric where there are 750 city employees per payroll staff member. Accounts payable also processed over 40,000 invoices last year. Next slide. Next, we have our general services division. This is often thought of as purchasing, but they do more than that. They perform formal bids and proposal packages. This ensures compliance with our policy and purchasing code, as well as encourages competition and, most importantly, avoids conflict of interest. In addition, they maintain our central warehouse of specialized inventory and perform mail carrier services. The division's been busy. They issued over 2,000 purchase orders and 250 contracts last year, as well as processed over 100 requests for proposal, requests for bids, and quotes. Next slide. Last, we have the administrative division. They provide administrative support and guidance in all the financial matters, including the issuance of debt, and also responsible for the development of the city budget. This is a year-long process that we incorporate with the entire city. This is an ongoing process for the budget team. We adopt in June and then immediately go right back to work in July for the following year. Next slide. And here's some key work efforts that we have coming up in fiscal year 2021. We'll continue to prepare the Measure C annual accountability report. This is an annual report that helps with the part of compliance and transparency. It outlines all our capital projects that are using Measure C funds, as well as providing a plan for the following year of what capital projects are planned. A project that's kind of been on hold for a couple of years, but due to staffing and workload issues, but we're hoping to get to it this next year, is the Citywide fixed assets inventory. So we're excited to get to work on that. And a big work effort coming up is the implementation of the new time and attendance system. So our accounting division will be working with IT and help incorporate that into our payroll system and get that online. And some efforts that we are we're putting our items into is concentrating on items that help with social distancing. Sorry about that. We're going to continue to work with customers and increase the number of paperless billing options, as well as evaluate some additional online payment methods so citizens can continue to conduct their city business. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Tomaszewski to go over financial overview.
Hi, thank you, Brandon Bodette. As Mr. Bodette stated, I'm Jennifer Tomaszewski, the Interim Finance Director. And now we're going to switch gears and look at the actual budget submittal for fiscal year 21. And then and that would be the status quo submittal pre-COVID. And then we'll switch gears to the impacts specific to the finance department general fund as a result of the pandemic. So in this next slide, this is our appropriations budget. It is a pie chart showing our major appropriation categories. We see that our general fund budget is 6.2 million, with the largest portion of that being our salaries and benefits, making up about 76% of that. And we have our allocated costs of about 14%. Those are internal service charges for like our IT support and our facilities charges and so on. And then we have our services and supplies budget, and that's where we pay for our annual audit contract, our banking services contracts. We have to buy, we're required each year to purchase actuarial reports. So they're more, they're mandated costs that we're required to purchase each year. And then probably our single biggest cost in this category is our postage for our bill processing for our business licenses and utility billing contracts. So again, $6.2 million budget pre-COVID. So if we could go to the next slide. So the next slide that we're looking at is our staff count for our general fund portion. So I think on that previous page, it included risk management, so the numbers don't tie exactly. But this is the general fund portion. And we put the comparison from 2010 on there to show kind of what was our staffing levels during the last recession. And I think this is a good visual to show that we've never really fully recovered from that. We've stayed a lean shop for a decade at this point. So 10 years later, we're almost at that same count. We each year, as part of our annual audit, our auditors, when they do their exit interview every year, they tell us that they're astonished at how much work we do with such a lean shop and how well we do that work. And I think that this shows that. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide, this is our proposed revenues. And again, this is our pre-COVID numbers. So even though we have an appropriation budget of about $6.2 million, we do budget about $500,000 a year in various revenue sources. We have miscellaneous licenses and permits. It's a small number, but that's where we have our one-day permits and some tobacco retailer licenses. We think that's going to be hit as an impact, but it's a small impact, but probably about a $4,000 decline in revenues by year end because of COVID. And then next year, we're not sure what that's going to look like. Fees and charges. This is our T-bid and our business improvement district fees. We collect a 3% administrative charge on processing those fees and then collecting them and distributing them to the downtown organization and Visit Santa Barbara. And I want to say around January, the T-bid fees increased. And so that's where you see that recommended adjustment between the original plan and 21 recommended was this is the 3% additional as a result of those increased fees. And these are going to track very similar to TOT, obviously on a much smaller scale, but we anticipate probably $20,000 to $30,000 decline this year. And depending on how quickly things bounce back next year, we do anticipate some impact in 21 revenues as well. Our biggest single revenue source is late payments for our utility bills. We have had the same rate for, I want to say at least 10 years. It's an $8 charge that we apply to delinquent utility bill payments. This is definitely going to be impacted with the shelter in place. We have not been collecting or charging a late payment since, I want to say, early March. And this will likely hit the impact by year end will probably be about $100,000 this year. Going into next year, it's going to depend on when we decide to start adding that, start collecting on the penalties again, and how we proceed going forward. And then our last revenue in other, really we get some miscellaneous reimbursements, the biggest one being our CalCard program. As long as we pay our credit card bill on time, we get a reimbursement each quarter. And in the last couple years, we've been using more credit cards citywide, and so that stipend's gone up a little bit. So main takeaway, main takeaway for 20 is probably about 120,000 revenue loss beyond what we see here with the 497. And then next year, we will see some declines, but probably very minor. Next slide, please. So this is the expenditures. Again, this is the table that kind of ties back to the chart we just looked at. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. You'll see the recommended, there's that $6.2 million. And then that flows into the next slide. So on the next two slides, will be probably the majority of my presentation. So as with the other departments within the city, in trying to adjust our budgets for the impacts of COVID, and in looking at what a 5% reduction would mean to our finance budget, that $6.2 million with a 5% reduction would equate to about $309,000. And we've identified 3 categories to address those reduction measures. The first one being our hourly staff, about 76,000. The next category, services and supplies, and then the majority of that, the reduction measures in salary reductions. And the next slide will talk about each of those 3 categories in more detail. So what does that mean to our budget, to our service level impacts? So the first category, that 76,000 of hourly, we kind of look at that in 2 phases. There's a short-term impact in how the last few years, how we've been kind of incrementally increasing that budget for our hourly staff, and then our long-term where we're planning to go with that. So I'm going to talk about the short-term first. There's really 2 programs that use most of that hourly budget, and that's our payroll and accounts payable division or program, and then our business licenses and cashiering. And as you may have picked up on Mr. Baudet's presentation, our payroll division's our payroll and accounts payable, it's 4 FTEs, and they do a large volume of work each year, 40,000 plus invoices, and processing payroll for when you look at our FTEs plus hourly, anywhere from 1,500 to 1,800 employees each pay period. They're a busy shop. So when you remove one person out of that, when we have, for example, system upgrades, and most recently our Kronos electronic timesheet project really affects the other staff that are trying to keep the volume of work. So we've been able to successfully use that hourly budget to help offset the additional work when we have special projects come up. And then in business licenses, it's a little bit unique. About a year ago, we were looking at our succession planning for the business licenses division. And we realized that within a 2-year period, 80% of our business licensing staff were planning on retiring. And that's a pretty stable department or program that had some long-term employees in that. So unfortunately, there's a lot of institutional knowledge there as well that we would be losing with those 80% turnover. So we've been able to use the hourly staff to do more cross-training and provide some more flexibility with that short term. It's given us another tool in managing that. And then going forward, I had mentioned on that slide with the FTEs that each year our auditors provide us feedback. And another item that we've heard for several years is that a city our size would ideally have an internal audit function. So we do some audits internally. We do petty cash, we do cash audits, compliance audits. Most recently, we've had to start doing cannabis audits, and we've had to outsource, for example, TOT audits, and we've kind of done a mixed bag this last year of kind of internal compliance audits with our cannabis and outsourcing that to contract. And but ideally, we would have another analyst level position to help us look at our special projects and give us more flexibility to do some of that project-based work when we look at better use of technology, updates to our credit cards. It's with the staff level that that we currently have, it's just difficult to get to those special projects. So ideally, we've been trying to build up this hourly budget to use it short term the way that we've been using, but with the goal of potentially adding a future analyst position in the future. So with the reduction of that, obviously, that puts us a little bit backwards, back to square one there. So services and supplies, as I stated on the pie chart, a lot of our services and supplies are mandated costs, and we don't have a lot of discretionary budget there. We did identify some meeting and travel that could be to be reduced. And then another item is our transparency tool. It's about $11,000 a year, and the impacts of losing that are obviously it's transparency to the public. We refer probably about 800 unique individuals or inquiries a year to that online function on our website, and in removing that would require when those inquiries happen, taking on having to provide those manually. So that's it for services and supplies. And then with our salary reductions, being such a small shop and being mostly labor, we have looked at what vacancies do we have open now, what future vacancies do we have coming from upcoming retirements, and how can we keep those positions filled? Keep those positions vacant. The consequences of that are longer response time to public inquiry and then to other city departments. We have a unique role in finance where, we're the custodians of the taxpayer dollars, and it's our job to ensure proper internal controls are in place and that there is transparency to the public. So anytime you're doing more, processing more widgets instead of reviewing them, you're putting yourself in, you're removing some of the ability to really manage those internal controls. And then we just, another potential is better use of our technology. We want to, and I think what COVID has shown us is, we really do need to modernize our use of technology. We've in the last few years, we've had some turnover. We've had some difficulty getting the resources together to be able to do a more consolidated, for example, credit card acceptance. We should, and I think what we've learned in this last year is that we just need to get there. We need to keep looking for more opportunities to give people, taxpayers doing city, doing city business, more flexibility in payment arrangements, and with the stay in place, we were able to accommodate and accept credit card payments over the phone, which aren't necessarily compliant with PCI compliance or industry standards. However, we've been able to accommodate that, and we need to keep looking at better uses of our technology. So with reductions in staff, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to do that. That being said, we have a very professional, hardworking staff. We are not the people on the front lines, putting out fires, and which wasn't fair that we had to go after police and fire, by the way. Finance isn't as exciting if you're not a numbers nerd like like all of us in finance who love our spreadsheets. But we are the figurative, we're putting out the figurative fires, and, no pun intended, but the buck really does stop with finance. And, we are those custodians of those taxpayer dollars, and, we take that very seriously. In these unprecedented times, we do recognize that, we have to do our part as well. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation and open it up to questions if you have any before we hand it off to Mr. Howard.
Oh, okay. Did you have a question at this juncture, Ms. Snedden? And then there's more presentation. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Tomaszewski. I have to say, you are on the front lines, trial by fire, I would say, coming in as interim right at the timing that you did. I can't imagine a bigger hurdle to jump over coming in just as you are. And thank you for taking that up. And I have some questions about that. So when it says salary reductions, you're talking about keeping positions open, not reducing established salaries. Is that correct?
So ideally, we would start first with holding vacancies before we have to actually, look at filled positions. Labor concessions are part of what the city's looking at. But, depending on what happens, we have to look at everything.
So is that in this number with salary reductions, that 218,000, is that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the terminology. Is that by leaving positions open or by possible labor negotiations or some combination? Is that like a target number or just?
Yeah, when we can't really cut out of our services and supplies, it's just kind of the plug by default is salaries. That's what we have left. I'll refer to, I think Mr. Casey answer this one.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Snedden. This is hard, cutting our budget by $10 million. And so this is one of the departments that's on the smaller side and doesn't have as many vacancies that we've seen other departments be able to react and respond to. So for now, it's kind of a plug number, and that's kind of what goes into the final package of what I'll present to you in June. So we weren't quite so specific because we don't want to be quite yet. And we'll kind of look at the whole package and see how we can get there when we come back to you in mid-June.
And then maybe this is a time to ask this and maybe not about, and this might be for Mr. Casey, I'm not sure, but so Ms. Tomaszewski, you've been doing such an amazing job as interim finance director, and I don't know where we are in a cycle of possibly getting you some relief in that. And if
yes,
that's
please.
Exactly. I cannot thank Ms. Tomaszewski enough for what she's been doing. She's doing double duty with her old job and the interim finance director job, and she is looking for help. So we have started the recruitment for finance director. I think it's absolutely necessary for the city to have a finance director. I hope that internal people will apply for it as well. But for department head positions, I always think it's important to go outside and hire the best person, whether it's an in-house candidate or an outside candidate. So we are starting that process and moving on it, but it's still a couple months away from filling.
Okay, thank you. So that's not in these reductions at this point. We are still going ahead with, okay. Thank you so much. And thank you again for just stepping up and what you've done at such a difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Tomaszewski or Mr. Oh, we have one more section. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of council. My name is Mark Howard. I am the risk manager and then the person assigned to manage the self-insurance fund. So with that, we'll go into a discussion about the budget for fiscal 21, the self-insurance fund. We will cover these 5 topics today, and I won't go through them right now because we're going to get to them in a moment. Next slide, please. So the history of the self-insurance fund. Council established the self-insurance fund in 1976 to self-fund workers' compensation claims. And over the ensuing decades, Council has amended our program through resolution several times, most recently in 2017. Next slide, please. So this is our core mission, protecting the city's financial assets using the key tenets of risk management, risk assessment, risk transfer, and risk financing. Next slide, please. As Ms. Tomaszewski and Mr. Beaudet mentioned earlier, the finance department has roughly 40 full-time equivalent employees. 4 of them reside in the self-insurance fund. The risk management division is the operating division for the self-insurance fund, and it maintains 3 programs in addition to the administration operations. Those are general liability, workers' compensation, and occupational safety and health. The full-time equivalents include 2 analysts, an administrative specialist, and the risk manager. And staffing levels here in the risk management division have remained unchanged over the last 2 decades. Next slide, please. So these are the few of the main tasks the risk management team accomplishes throughout the year. These include claims adjusting, return to work programs, safety training to minimize or eliminate hazards and claims, insurance to minimize damages, and risk transfer through insurance or contractual means. Next slide, please. So over the next several slides, I'm going to be talking about some of the background and get into the details on what the self-insurance fund does. So here we're going to provide a view of claim trends over the past number of years in the self-insurance fund relating specifically to workers' compensation and liability programs. And these will help demonstrate the trends and provide context about the costs associated with claims. So 2 of the concepts we'll be talking about, claim frequency and claim severity, are a couple of the key matrices used by the insurance industry to track performance, or commonly referred to by how many claims and how much did we pay. So this is a graphic view of the number of claims reported or claim frequency for both the workers' compensation and liability programs. What we see are, over the past 2 decades, a continuing trend of a dramatic decrease in the number of claims reported compared to historic levels. About a 40% decrease in workers' compensation claims and about a 21% decrease in liability claims. That's the good news for the city. Next slide, please. So moving on to claim severity, and we'll first look at workers' compensation. This slide shows the total cost for all workers' compensation claims reported in each fiscal year. This is our claim severity concept. The trend on claim severity or cost is moving in the opposite direction of the frequency results. We are seeing fewer claims, but much more expensive claims. I want to point out a couple of examples on this slide. So if we look at the graph, you'll see in fiscal year 2010, we expect to pay $1.5 million for all the claims that were reported in that year. As we slide forward to fiscal year 2015, similar number of claims reported, and we expect to pay double what we thought we would pay for the fiscal 2010 claims. They're that much more expensive. If we slide forward one more time to 2019, we'll see that they have doubled yet once again. So claim costs are going up over time. Next slide, please. And here's another look at that data. This is the average claim cost. What are we paying on average for each claim that's reported in the fiscal year? And you can see that between 2010, average claim costs of $11,000. By 2015, that average claim cost had doubled to $22,000. When we slide over to 2019, the average claim cost has more than tripled from fiscal year 2010. Next slide, please. Switching to the liability program and still looking at the claim severity, this slide shows the total value of costs for each claim and by fiscal year. The trend again is going upward, opposite our trend in our frequency of claims. So again, more expensive claims happening each and every year. And is it doubling? I can't say it's doubling, but it is getting greater, as you can see on this slide. Next slide, please. And again, if we look at the average claim costs for liability claims in 2010, a little over $1,000 per claim. By 2018, our average claim cost is over $12,000. Just another graphic view of how much the claims are increasing over time. Next slide, please. This is a compilation of both the liability and workers' compensation claim costs for the last period of time. And it shows that over the last number of years, the total cost for all claims is hovering at about the $6 million level. That's important for us to keep in mind. So in preparation for a budget, the city hires an actuary to calculate the value of expected claim payments in any fiscal year. And during the past several fiscal years, what the city has done is we've reduced the amount appropriated for claim payments below that figure identified by the actuary. So in our current budget, in a few slides later, I'll talk about our appropriation of just over $3.3 million to pay for workers' comp and liability claims combined, which is significantly less than what the actuarial had identified that we should be allocating. The actuary identified over $4.4 million for the same claims. Next slide, please. So this leads us to a brief discussion about reserves, because if we keep putting in less money than the actuary says, we are going to have to use our reserves. Next slide, please. So here's a graphic look at what the self-insurance reserves have been over the past 10 years. As you can see, the chart shows that the self-insurance fund exceeded its needs shortly after the economic downturn in 2010. What we did citywide is we rebated that extra funds in our reserve balances back to the general fund and enterprise fund to assist in their recovery from the economic downturn in 2010. We maintain these reserves on hand as cash assets to pay for future costs associated with the reported claims, as well as what the industry refers to as incurred but not reported claims, claims that we know have happened but have not been presented to us just yet. So the actuary calculates how much we need to hold in reserve to pay for those claims in the coming period of time. Next slide, please. So as we move into the outlook for fiscal year 2021, there's a few key components I want you to keep in mind. Our fund reserve, our current cash balance, is approximately $4.5 million below the amount recommended by the actuary. Our planned budget, based on pre-COVID data, did not plan to use any of the cash balance or add to it. This means the self-insurance fund maintains funds available to operate for the current fiscal cycle and in the near term, but we do need to address the reserve shortfall in the coming fiscal cycles. The important point that I want to make here before moving on is that the self-insurance fund maintains adequate funding to operate in the near term. Staff recognizes that the ability to address the unfunded reserve balance will create added pressure when establishing the next two-year budget plan, but that's for next year. For now, we have to look at fiscal 21. Next slide, please. So with that, we'll walk through the budget for fiscal 21. As an intra-city service, the self-insurance fund revenues consist of allocated costs that are paid by each of the operations throughout the city. This pie chart identifies the amount of revenue collected for each of the 4 programs: workers' compensation, liability, occupational safety and health, and administrative services. Total of $8.6 million. Next slide, please. When we look at appropriations by type, you will see that salary and benefits and allocated costs are just a small component of the total expenditures within the self-insurance fund. Supplies and services comprise 89% of the total self-insurance fund expenses. Next slide, please. And more than 97% of all expenses under the supplies and services heading are spent on insurance and claims. So that's where our greatest expenditure happens year in and year out. Next slide, please. So looking at the appropriations by program, you'll see that workers' compensation remains the largest component within the self-insurance fund, just slightly under half of all expenses. And what I'm going to do over the next several slides is go over the major expenses relating to insurance and claims within workers' compensation, liability, and administrative operations to show you where those monies go. So first, we're going to look at the workers' compensation program. The cost drivers here are claim payments, excess insurance, third-party administration costs, and an annual state assessment. So the city maintains a self-insured retention for workers' compensation claims at $750,000. What that means is that the city pays first $750,000 out of the self-insurance fund operating budget. The city then purchases excess insurance to cap its exposure to loss on any individual claim. The excess insurance market for workers' compensation remains volatile at this time. We projected a small decrease for the insurance premium for fiscal 21, but we will actually know the true value of the premium in mid-June. The city uses a third-party administrator to conduct the daily operations of claims adjusting, and we are just now completing our second year with a new vendor called AdminSure. And the last item there, the state assessment. Every self-insured entity has an assessment issued by the state of California to operate the Department of Insurance budget. And our contribution this past year was $105,000. Next slide, please. So liability program. Here the cost drivers are mainly claim payments and excess insurance. The city maintains a $1 million self-insured retention for all liability claims. Again, that means that on any given claim, the self-insurance fund will pay the first $1 million, and then we purchase excess insurance to cap our exposure to loss on any individual claim. This is an area where the cost for excess insurance for liability continues a multi-year trend of significant increases. We projected a moderate increase for fiscal 21, and we will know what that truly will look like in mid-June. Next slide. And here in the admin operations component is where we purchase specialty insurance to protect the city from specific types of loss exposure. There are 7 main types of specialty insurance purchased by the city. I'll walk through each of them rather quickly. The first is property insurance. This covers the 480 buildings and structures owned by the city for things like fire or wind damage. Earthquake and flood, sometimes referred to as difference in condition, covers damage from flood or earthquake exposures. We purchase a separate policy for the airport operations, for the commercial component of the airport, the airline terminal, and the like. The marine insurance involves the 21 boats owned by the city and covering for those operations on the water. We purchase cyber insurance, cyber liability insurance, because we do a variety of online financial transactions. We purchase fiduciary liability for the operations of the various benefit plans, both health and retirement type benefits. And lastly, there's the purchase of a bond. Several of our positions within the city are obligated by California law to have a bond. Those examples include the city clerk, city treasurer, cash handlers, and notary staff. So you can see that the recommended budget for $1.7 million to cover just those purchases alone. Next slide, please. And so we'll move on to a quick review of some performance and work objectives. And the performance and work objectives remain unchanged for fiscal 21 for the self-insurance fund, but some recent highlights. Implemented a new software program used by the Risk Management Division to handle our claims. We assisted dozens of employees to return to modified work after work-related injuries in the past fiscal year. We conducted 43 safety training sessions for city staff, and we also created a new video-based safety training program geared towards newly hired employees. And here's the final stuff that everybody's been talking about, the reductions. And before I get into talking about the specific reductions, I want to give you a little bit of context. The self-insurance fund is a unique fund created to protect city assets. And we present these items to you, consider as reductions, knowing that our percentage of savings does not match what everybody else has been talking about in the 5% range. So the first item is something you've heard about several times, and that's the training component, where we try to keep our staff up to current standards in their technical skills. It's a nominal amount of $6,500. The next reduction is in the allocations for claim payments. We talked earlier about how much we are going to be paying for claims, what we expect to pay for claims, but we are thinking that we can reduce the allocations for both workers' compensation and liability claims by $150,000 each. This reduction does provide some relief to the general fund while requiring the self-insurance fund to use reserves to cover expected claim payments that we believe are coming. Achieving the 3.5% reduction is not without some danger to the city's bottom line. The proposed reduction comes with an uncertain hazard. Reducing these allocations for claim payments is going to require us to use reserves. We recognize that. The hazard comes in is if the actual claim payments either approach or exceed what the actuary identified at $4 million. So we know we could be using somewhere in the range of a few $100,000 to over $1 million in reserves to balance the budget. The additional piece I want to convey to everyone is additional reductions to achieve a 5% reduction in costs could be unwise, because the actual cuts may provide an immediate cost savings, but increased costs later in the year. The increased costs likely would exceed any potential or perceived savings. So we think it's prudent to look at this 3.5% reduction rather than going to a more aggressive 5% reduction that may not actually save us any money. With that, I'll entertain questions.
Thanks so much, Mr. Howard. This presentation and the last really gives us pause about certain functions that are so important and how we would be okay with budget cuts in these functions. So go ahead, Ms. Nin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm looking at slide 14 and the 10-year history of reserve balance. And is that the recommended reserve? The blue line is the recommended reserve for the self-insurance fund? Or is
Madam
that?
Mayor,
yeah.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, you are correct. The blue line is the recommended reserve from the actuary. The red line is the actual cash assets held by the city.
So on slide 14, sorry, slide.
Next, two more.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not slide 14. Our printed copy just didn't have figures on it printed, so I had them send, and so it's slide 33, 14 Matt. Of your presentation.
There it is.
That's the one, thank you. That seems dangerously underfunded even before COVID. I'm gonna say that, I mean, insurance, big deal. And I'm wondering, you didn't mention here, and maybe I just have to ask it, are we do we have some savings by fighting cases better, by handling the legal aspects of this in a different way? I mean, is there some savings to be found there that we might be able to project in here without having to actually take down our cash held in the self-insurance fund? It's just, I'm very worried about going even further, making that delta even greater between the recommended and how much cash we're holding in it. If you could comment on that.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, that's a great question. And my answer to that is we handle each claim on its own merits, and where we need to pay, we always do. Where we need to fight, we typically do. But as a philosophical matter, that's something for the council to tell us. And we take our guidance from you. And could we do a better job? That's always an option. We're always trying to improve in every area. Claims handling is just one of the many. And so I agree with you. The delta is a troubling delta. It's a troubling number. We don't take that lightly. We looked at this very diligently, and we want to do our part. We need to help with the overall general fund budget. We have reserves. They're there for a reason. Do we like using reserves? Not unless we have to. COVID-19 might be an area where we have to. We recognize it's a short-term solution, and are we kicking the can down the road to the next 2-year budget plan? Yes, we are. We'll have to do something in fiscal 22 and beyond, and there's not a good answer here.
Thank you. And I in no way meant to question. We really value your judgment and your guidance that you give us in these types of cases. I'm just hoping we wouldn't have to take so much out of that. Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kovan has something to add?
Yeah, I think I can help a little bit. I think the two aspects to the question. One, can the city win its way out of the delta between the money we put away and what the actuaries say we should put away? I don't think so. Two, do we question whether we have the right talent on each case? Answer, yes. I use, and the council's aware of this, 4 warrants to make recommendations to the council on the use of outside lawyers. One would be the need for specialized expertise that's not efficient to develop in-house. 2 would be a major case where we want marquee talent. 3 might be conflict of interest. And 4 is overflow, when we try and do that as rarely as possible. So that analysis is baked into our process. Mr. Howard conducts a litigation meeting with us regularly to go through all of our cases and help with that analysis. So good questions.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Mr. Friedman?
Thank you. If you could go to I really want to understand the last slide on the self-insurance fund reductions and the reductions of 150,000 for workers' comp claims and liability claims. That's our allocation. That's for a 3.5%. What is the risk if we don't have that 150? What is it that it's projected to cost us, and how much of the reserves? If that makes sense.
Madam Mayor, Councilman Friedman, I believe I understand your question. And so we put aside a certain amount of dollars to pay for claims. And we use that to then allocate costs out to the operating departments, including the general fund and the enterprise funds. So if we reduce that by $150,000, we're reducing the amount we're charging the operating entities to perform our function. If the claims happen to spend more than what we have appropriated, we will then have to balance our books at the end of the year, and with that, use some of our reserves to make us even at the end of the year.
And you gave us a lot of information, so I'm trying to understand, based on your projections, is that scenario likely with this, I'm going to call it 300,000, 150 for each one reduction, or are we reasonably confident that we want? I know it switches every year and there's different, but, and I know that's kind of we have to face, but what is the likelihood that we would have to dip into reserves based on, and how much?
So our look at this is that we've been spending close to the number that we have allocated using this reduction for the last couple of years. We do have the potential of having a larger claim settlement that could upset the apple cart. You're looking for a percentage. I think I'm about 80% confident that we'll be within our appropriated number, but there's a 20% window there that we will be beyond our allocated number and need to use reserves. Would that be in the full 300,000 range here? Possibly. Could it be more than that? Yes. Could it be less than that? Yes.
So this 300,000 that's come down, that's within the historical range of going the last couple of years. That's what we project.
Yes.
So if we follow our past trends, we should pencil out or relatively close to it. But if we have, then we would go to reserve, but we wouldn't know until those cases are settled.
Correct.
Okay. Right. I just wanted to be sure we weren't doing an upfront. So Mrs. Tomaszewski, I think I just
yeah. Councilmember Friedman, I'd just like to chime in real quick. This isn't introducing more risk into the equation. It's really a timing of when we would recoup those costs from departments, being if we went over our appropriations budget, we would be, as Mr. Howard stated, kicking the can down the road to collect it in 22 and beyond.
Okay, so it's not increasing our risk because we have to pay for it either way. But this allows us to go to historical and try to meet our budget.
Yeah, what this does, when we, I'm sorry, I didn't let you finish. When we create our appropriations budget, we look at what we're historically spending there and we set that budget, and then we collect that from departments through through revenues back to the self-insurance fund. So if we spend less, or if our appropriation is less, then we're just collecting less of that right now.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So we're not increasing our risk. It's just we're budgeting for it. Okay, thank you. You answered my questions on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Friedman. Any other city council members with questions for Mr. Howard, or you've thought about anything Ms. Tomaszewski or Mr. Baudet had to present? Okay, let me ask the clerk, Mr. Howard, if we have anyone for public comment. Ms. Clerk?
Madam Mayor and Council, no public commenters.
Okay, so the floor is open for any closing remarks from the City Council. Ms. Tomaszewski, go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm disappointed that finance is so much more exciting than police and fire. So that's all.
Oh, thank you. Sometimes when we have, when the chambers were open pre-COVID, there would be nobody here to pay attention to the budget. So it's good that we have meetings over time, and the public can certainly chime in at another budget hearing about anything they heard. So it's an open process, and if no one else has anything else to say, I will thank you, Ms. Tomaszewski, and your staff. I thank fire and police today for their presentations, and we'll go ahead and close this budget session, but I should let people know that we don't have a city council meeting on Tuesday. It's Memorial Day holiday. So the next time we're convening again, the Santa Barbara City Council, is Wednesday, May 27th, and we're having a morning budget session. So that's 9 in the morning, and the departments are library and public works. So with thanks and to our staff, and my council members will adjourn this meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. Thank you.